Chapter 4. Integrity found herself riding in the SUV, barricaded in the third row of seats. A man wearing dark sunglasses drove the vehicle, silently, while a man in the passenger seat constantly scanned their surroundings. No one sat in the middle row of seats. A third man sat on the opposite end of the seat from her, slouched comfortably in his seat, seemingly unconcerned with the world around him. As her heart rate slowed, her thinking quickened. She could only assume that these people were from Westmarch, but, unlike Glegnar, they had been surprisingly gentle. Granted, she'd probably have bruises on her upper arm where one man had gripped her, and the muscles in her shoulders still ached, but comparable to what the slave master had dished out on a regular basis, that was like having someone stick their tongue out at you. Uncomfortable, she fastened her seatbelt out of habit. The man across from her, without even looking out of the corner of his eye, let a smirk slip across his face. Obviously, her action had amused him. She thought briefly about taking the seatbelt back off, but decided that would just amuse him even more, knowing that she was aware of what he was thinking. Her constant appraisal of the car revealed no means of escape. Even if she dared bail from the vehicle while it was traveling at freeway speeds, which she doubted, getting to the door would be nigh impossible. Not only would she have to unbuckle and climb over the back of the seats in front of her, with 3 men in the car she stood little chance of even touching the door handle. While the thought of returning to her prison was unpleasant, it seemed distant enough to not concern her more than passingly. At the moment, she was more concerned with who these people were, what they were going to do to her, and where Ben was. As she'd been dragged from the park, she had heard sounds of a scuffle behind her, and the sound of Ben saying something protestingly. They had still been snapping the seats back into place when the SUV had pulled away from the curb. She hadn't dared to turn and look behind them at the park, hoping to catch a glimpse of Ben. Occasionally, the men in the front would say short phrases, usually sentence fragments, that made no sense to Integrity. The only information she could glean was that the driver, who looked to be nearly 40 years old, was named Bowman. The man in the passenger seat had extremely short blonde hair and occasionally made short remarks containing numbers and letters jumbled together nonsensically. At least Integrity could look at them while pretending to study the road. The man to her side was a challenge. She felt like an idiot and couldn't openly stare at him, but glancing from the corner of her eye was becoming painful. Plus, she was pretty sure he had caught her looking a couple of times. His demeanor was extremely unsettling to her. Why would the 2 men in the front be so tense and focused while he acted as though he were on a long car ride through the most boring landscape ever? All 3 men were dressed in suits, although the man next to her was wearing neither jacket or tie. At some point the girl must have fallen asleep. She was awoken by a less than gentle prod. Dismay crossed her face to see that she had returned to Westmarch so quickly. She wondered briefly why she was able to relax enough to sleep in the car with her captors when she hadn't been able to do so in the hotel room with Ben. She chalked it up to exhaustion as she stumbled from the SUV. The 2 men who had sat in the front of the vehicle led her through a small door secreted in the walls of the castle, while the third followed closely behind her. She walked up a number of stairs, though she lost count on which story she was on. The only thing she knew was that the room they led her to was on at least the 3rd or 4th floor. After walking through the doorway into her new quarters, before she even had a chance to look around, one of the men spoke. "Guard from the interior." By the time she had turned around to see who had spoken, the man who had sat in the back of the car with her was leaving, and one of the other 2 men, Bowman, was closing the door after him. Both of the remaining men turned to face her, silent. Creeped out, her skin crawling, Integrity forced herself to turn around, hopefully looking nonchalant. The room before her made her last residence look like a 1-star motel. The small entry in which she stood held the recessed door and the 2 men. She walked forward to better view her surroundings. The bed, looking extremely cushy, was off to her left. Directly across from the door was a decorative seating arrangement made of low tables and 3 armchairs. To her right was a large paned window with a door on either side. With a nervous glance over her shoulder to make sure that neither man had moved, she stepped out of their line of view and opened the first door, which concealed an empty walk-in closet. She shut the door as quietly as she could, trailing her fingers across the antique knob. The second door led to a bathroom the likes of which she had never seen. Translucent windows bordered the ceiling, while crystal chandeliers and sconces offered soft light. "This bathroom's bigger than my room at home is," she thought in amazement. It seemed like there were comfortable places to sit everywhere. Separate shower and bath took up some of the remaining space, but what seemed to be acres of tiles stretched between each item. She snapped the lights off and walked back out into the room. Now what? She walked to the window and looked out. She felt slightly dizzy to be at the height she was. There were very few trees in the adjacent forest that were tall enough to be eye level. They stretched on as far as she could see. The sun appeared to be setting somewhere off to the left. Escaping to the forest? Not the best idea. She paced aimlessly until she caught a glimpse of the men out of the corner of her eye. They were so utterly silent she had completely forgotten they were there. She hurriedly sat down, feeling like an idiot. After listening to herself breathe until she thought she'd go mad, the silence was broken by one of the guards, the younger one. He had murmured something. As she turned to look at him, he dropped his left arm back to his side. "Is there anything you require, miss?" He sounded like he was genuinely eager to assist, but she hesitated. "Anything at all," he prodded. Surreptitiously wiping her damp palm on the leg of her jeans, she said, "I would like something to eat. I haven't had anything since breakfast." Though he obviously tried to mask his surprise, Integrity noticed that he seemed shocked by her request. "Why? I was with them all day. They didn't feed me. Of course I'm hungry." Frustrated that she felt as though she'd committed a faux pas, Integrity called the guard a few choice names in her head. While his partner collected himself, Bowman asked, "What would you prefer, miss? We'll have something brought directly." Feeling flustered, Integrity shrugged grouchily. "Whatever, I don't care." Bowman paused as though he wanted to say something more, but instead raised his left arm to his mouth and murmured something into it. "Ah, they have radios. Another challenge." After a short pause, Bowman said something else inaudible before clasping his hands loosely in front of him and looking away from Integrity's gaze. Integrity noticed a small black book sitting on the table near her elbow. She picked it up for lack of anything else to do. It was hard-bound and appeared to have never been read. She turned it over to find the title, but both sides were blank. The binding announced in gold lettering, "Creed of the Elite," followed in small o letters by P. Ketterman. Integrity opened the book to the flyleaf, the binding cracking quietly, but it offered no additional information. As she turned to the introduction, a quiet rap sounded at her door. Her head snapped around, straining the muscles in her neck. She had not realized she was so tense. The younger guard placed his finger against his ear, listening for a moment, then nodded to his partner and opened the door. Gallia entered, carrying a silver tray with a cover. Integrity snapped the book shut and stood hurriedly. "Gallia!" she exclaimed, moving toward the familiar face. Surprised pleasure lit up Gallia's face, and she gracefully set the tray down on the nearby bed and met Integrity in the middle of the floor. "Integrity!" The two hugged, then pulled away and smiled at one another. "What are you doing here? Gallia caught herself and stopped talking. Straightening up, she picked up the serving tray once more and carried it to the low coffee table and set it down slowly. "Here is your food, miss. I hope you will find it appealing." Pulling a metal goblet off of the tray, Gallia straightened and looked at Integrity once more. She queried, "Is there anything else you require?" Confused by Gallia's sudden change in demeanor, Integrity struggled to get control of her feelings. "I don't have clothes, toothpaste." Integrity trailed off, waving her hand vaguely in the air. "Certainly, miss. I will bring you the necessities immediately." Dropping a curtsy, Gallia turned and floated from the room. Integrity sank into a nearby chair, overwhelmed. What is going on? And why did she take my drink? Integrity sank into a nearby chair, perplexed. Unfocused, she lifted the lid of the tray to find a plate of food artfully arranged. Her attention focused clearly on the plate. I like everything on here. That's strange. I'm such a picky eater that there's always something I don't like. They didn't even put dressing on the salad. Picking up the bowl of soup, suddenly aware of her empty stomach, she began eating, trying desperately not to slurp in front of the two men. Shortly after she finished her meal, Gallia returned, her arms full of clothing on hangers. She carefully placed them on the bed, then began efficiently hanging them in the closet. Integrity frowned slightly. Most of the clothes were floor-length dresses. While they were intricately beautiful, prom quality even, Integrity hated dressing up, and did so only when necessary, for church or funerals. Guess I can't have everything. Even when she walked over and helped to hang the clothing, Gallia remained silent. Integrity felt too awkward to try to make small talk, so when Gallia offered her a package wrapped in spotlessly white paper and tied with a faintly pink ribbon, she said a simple thank you. "Is there anything else you require, ma'am?" "You will not cry," Integrity chastised herself. She shook her head, not trusting herself to speak. Gallia curtsied again, collected the tray silently, the dishes all empty, and left the room. Integrity paced the room restlessly, gazing out of the window occasionally. I could deal with the boredom. I've done it before, but I feel like an animal in the zoo with those two watching my every move. I could go in the bathroom and get out of their view, but then they'll think I'm actually using the bathroom. That's not any better. Time passed. How much, Integrity didn't know. Occasionally, one or the other of the guards would talk into the microphones hidden in their sleeves. At one point, someone came to the door, but the younger of the two guards exited before Integrity could catch a glimpse of the visitor. The guard returned, and things continued in the same strain, with no variation. Integrity felt as though she were 3/4 asleep, a necessary state of mind learned while in the jail cell when the door opened again. She immediately snapped to attention, a brief pain pulsing through her skull, to see two more men enter the room. In an instant, she recognized one man as the one that had helped to recapture her, the one that had sat on the back seat of the SUV with her. The other man she did not recognize, but she felt an instant connection to him. The look of terror in his eyes was achingly familiar to her. The man from the car held the second man by his upper arm. The prisoner, she didn't know what else to call him, looked around frantically. "What's going on? I don't understand," he said, only to be cut off by a swift punch about halfway down his back, off to one side. He inhaled sharply and fell silent. Integrity refocused her attention on the other men, her mind automatically cataloging information. All three of the Westmarch men were watching her intently, tense and ready to spring. What's going on? I don't know this guy. Do they think I do? At least 30 seconds passed in silence, except for the prisoner's labored breathing. The tension grew with each passing second, pressing on the girl's chest, making each breath a challenge. The man holding the prisoner frowned impatiently and reached swiftly into a pocket, extracting something that glinted in the light. Integrity stepped forward automatically, raised her hand to stop him, but it was too late. The pocket knife pierced the prisoner's arm, blood flowing swiftly from the gash. The man yelped. Integrity's gaze snapped to that of the perpetrators. He stared intently back, but made no movement. Enraged, she spat out, "What is wrong with you? Why did you do that?" Returning her gaze to the injured man's arm, she saw that while the wound wasn't a scratch, it wasn't likely to endanger the man's life. Not knowing what else to do, feeling frustratingly helpless, she walked to the closet and ripped an item of clothing from its hanger, not caring what she had grabbed. As she moved toward the group of men, the two guards stepped forward, obviously ready to stop her. She hesitated, but when they made no further move, she slowly stepped closer and raised the material to the injured man's bicep. "Hold this here. Press hard," she instructed gently, her heart thundering in her ears. She could see beads of sweat covering the man's forehead. He appeared to be trembling, whether from fear or pain she couldn't tell. Instinctively, the man followed her instructions and clenched the dress to his wound. Now what? Integrity didn't know what to do. Should she stay where she was? Should she move away? Were the men going to kill them both now? Why aren't they doing anything? The man holding the arm of the prisoner stared intently into her eyes, seeming to try to read her mind. Integrity stared back, noticing vaguely that his eyes were such a deep brown they appeared to be almost black. Unexpectedly, the man grunted, spun, and dragged the man from the room. The elder of the guards followed him out, closing the door quietly behind them. "Please step away from the door." The order was spoken firmly, fearlessly by the younger of the two guards. What was his name? Paul? Integrity backed away from the door, unsettled that the guard was so assured of his ability to make her comply. Does he have a weapon? Probably. The other guy had a knife, after all. After a few minutes, Bowman, the older guard, returned and gestured for Paul to leave the room with him. The door shut behind them, and no matter how long Integrity waited, neither re-entered the room. She was alone. Integrity must have fallen asleep because she woke up when Gallia gently touched her arm. "I've brought more food. I didn't want it to get cold," she apologized. Rubbing the blurriness from her eyes, Integrity sat up straighter in the armchair. "Thank you," she murmured automatically. When Gallia stood silently, Integrity gestured toward the other chair. "Want to sit down?" Gallia smiled before sitting in the chair. "I want to apologize for the way I behaved earlier. I fear I offended you." Integrity shrugged like she didn't really care. "Really? I didn't even notice." Gallia gave her a slightly disappointed look, and Integrity said, "Okay, so I did. I thought you were mad at me." Gallia laughed lightly, covering her mouth demurely with one hand. "No, I was not angry with you." Gallia glanced toward the closed door. "The way we act together, how I speak to you, it is not seemly." "What? Why not?" Integrity was confused. It's not like Gallia was prone to swearing or telling ribald jokes. Gallia dropped her gaze briefly. "Stations. We are not of the same caste, and I should not act as though we are. I should not even be sitting now." Gallia looked hesitantly at Integrity, prepared to stand at the least sign. It was Integrity's turn to laugh. "You think I'm better than you? Please, who could possibly be lower than a prisoner?" "A slave, for one." A small smile softened Gallia's words. "It does not bother you that I am so improper in my behavior toward you?" "I'm sure. You're the only person in this place I can talk to. The last thing I want is you bowing and scraping to me." Gallia seemed pleased, but faintly surprised. Integrity pressed on eagerly. "So what's going on with Ben? What have you heard? Is he okay?" Gallia hesitated, obviously choosing her words carefully. "Ben is—" She paused. "In custody." "He's in jail?" Integrity leaned toward Gallia, her mind focused intently. "Why? Why is he in jail when I'm here?" She gestured vaguely at the room. Again Gallia chose her words carefully. "Yes, Ben is in the prison below the castle." She paused, debating whether to go on. Integrity gestured impatiently for her to continue. "The reason he is there and you are not is that Ben did not have permission to remove you from Westmarch." Integrity shook her head in confusion. "Of course he didn't have permission. We were running away. That still doesn't explain why he's being punished when I'm not." "You are a separate person from the son of Dagnus. You cannot be treated identically." Unsatisfied with the answers she was getting, Integrity pressed on to a different topic. "Am I free to go, or am I a prisoner too?" "The guards are still outside of your room and will remain there constantly. The council does not wish you to leave, nor will they allow you to." Integrity slumped back in her chair. "So basically, even though I'm not in a prison cell, I'm still an inmate." Gallia nodded once. "That's just peachy." Realizing how harsh her voice sounded, Integrity gave Gallia a sheepish smile. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't be so grumpy. At least I have you. I could be a lot worse off." Gallia smiled softly. "No apology necessary. I know how you feel." She reached forward and touched the back of Integrity's hand. They both jerked back instinctively. "You're freezing!" Integrity exclaimed. "And you're not," Gallia responded, matter of fact. "Forgive me, I had forgotten." Forgotten what? That you're cold? Gallia smiled vaguely. So anyway, what is a prisoner allowed? Do I just have to sit here and be bored all the time? I could bring you some books if you like. The castle has quite an extensive library. Integrity picked up the book from the coffee table. Gallia tensed and leaned forward. I do have this one, but it shouldn't take long to read. Careful to not touch Integrity, Gallia gently pulled the book from her grasp. After studying the binding, Gallia set the book in her lap and said, "Oh, you wouldn't be interested in this. I'm afraid it's very dry. How would you like some Dickens?" "I've never read him before, but it's worth a shot. I'd appreciate it." An unsettled feeling fluttered at the back of Integrity's mind, but she forced herself to shove it away. "Excellent." Gallia stood fluidly and moved to the door, turning for a brief smile before exiting. Integrity caught a clear glimpse of the guards stationed outside, the two same men that had been with her from the beginning. Don't they ever get a break? Abruptly, Integrity smacked herself on the forehead. Idiot! Why didn't you ask Gallia about them bringing in that man and stabbing him in the arm? She sighed in frustration, knowing that sleep would be a long time in coming. The man was obviously frustrated. He paced back and forth restlessly, seeming violent in his sharp movements. Stopping near a side table, he grasped a glass paperweight. He stared at the strange design for a moment, anger sweeping over his face more and more with each passing second. With a sound more akin to a growl than anything else, he turned with lightning speed and hurled the item against the far wall, at least 15 feet away, where it shattered. He stared unseeing at the spot where the glass had collided with the wall. His features mechanically shifted back to his normal appearance of bored calm. Tucking his button-up shirt back into his immaculate black trousers, he exited the room, swinging the door shut behind him. No one was near enough to have heard anything. He'd made sure of that.